Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ascend's Women in Leadership series. Today, I am honored to be here today with Sally Helgesen. She is a world-renowned expert on women's leadership and the best-selling author of one of my favorite books, How Women Rise. Today, we're going to chat around what are the behaviors that often hold us back as women and in the workplace, and how can we 10x our career growth? What are specific actions you can take to get that growth that you really want? And I'm going to share more you'll see why this is my favorite book as we dive more into it. I'm Shivani. I'm the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer an online leadership program for women. What inspired me to start Ascend was I used to be in your shoes. I owned and led different product and business initiatives at large companies like PayPal and high growth startups. As I was moving up to management, I learned how to get buy-in and motivate my teams by honestly making a ton of mistakes. Some guidance, but primarily a lot of mistakes. So I wanted to create the leadership program that I wish I had access to when I was making the transition. And really with the mission to elevate more women into leadership. I believe that's a big way that we see the change that we need to see in today's world, in today's work environments. And we've been doing it. We've had women from companies like Google, Slack, Peloton, DoorDash come out of the program confident, being able to grow faster in their career, including getting promoted and getting buy-in, even from difficult personalities. So much of the program is curated by senior leaders who've been in your shoes. I really think we need to have more open and honest conversations around what it takes to be successful in the workplace. And that's a big reason why we host these chats. I am super excited to be here today with Sally. As I shared, she is an expert on women's leadership. And it's actually kind of a crazy / funny story of how we met or how we're here today. So I had posted on LinkedIn about a month and a half ago that How Women Rise is one of my favorite leadership books. And then Sally commented on it. I was like, whoa, this is so cool. One of my favorite authors commenting on my post. And, when I started the Women in Leadership series chats, Sally, I haven't shared this with you yet, but you were actually one of my dream speakers to have on here. I was like, today I want to have Sally come join us. And one of my life philosophies is you 100% of the shots you don't take. So I'm like, I email her. Let me ask if she'll join. And if she says no, it's fine, but at least I'll try. And you say yes. I was so thrilled to have you here for this conversation. Sally is a powerhouse. She has spent the past 30 years just thinking about women in leadership roles. There's so much that we can learn from her. Wall Street Journal has credited Sally in bringing the language of inclusion into the business world. Think about that. We talk so much about inclusion and diversity. Sally is the one who initiated that conversation. That is incredibly inspiring, and what an impact you've made. Thank you for that, Sally. Her advice is always really practical and so down to earth. I think there's going to be many times in this conversation, you're going to be like, whoa, it feels like Sally's in my head right now as we're talking through things. Sally, thank you so much for joining us. Really grateful to have you here.
Oh, wonderful to be here, Shivani. My pleasure.
Thank you. So today, Sally and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes about the topics that are on all of our minds. And then we're going to dive into Q&A. So as we go through it, throw any questions in the Q&A icon that's at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. You can add questions and upvote questions. And we want this to be fun and valuable for you. So if anything resonates with you, then throw it in the chat. And reminder, when you put stuff in the chat, change your settings to panelists and attendees. Because right now, only we can see it if it's just panelists. So Sally, I'd love for you to, we'd love to hear from you, what inspired you to go into this work? What's brought you here today? So where you've done so much, you've done such a big impact. We'd love to learn more from your side.
Sure. I've been in women's leadership now for 32 years. And what inspired me was my own experience in the workplace. In the 1980s, I was in corporate communications, and I worked for some very good companies. But what I saw, what I noticed, what was very clear to me is those companies had absolutely no idea of what to do with the skills women had at a strategic level, none. And there was no channel for the talented women to make their voices heard in the companies I worked for. as leaders. So I decided that a good way to address this might be to look at how some of the most successful women-led organizations, I felt that companies would be open to that information. So I started off on a journey. That research became the book, The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, published 1990, still in print after 31 years. And I think that because that was the first book that looked at what women had to contribute to the workplace rather than how they needed to change and adapt. Companies started calling me, come in, speak to our women. There wasn't much going on in 1990, but I was there at the beginning. So it just went on from there. And I wrote, 7 more books and tons of articles and gave workshops and programs all over the world since that book came out in 1990.
That's an incredible story. I love that. I also love that, both of us got started in this work because of our own experiences in the workplace and just helping to drive that change. That's amazing. Really appreciate that. So let's dive right into it. You talk a lot about speaking while female. So we've all experienced, I think most, if not all of us in this quote unquote room have been in a meeting where we've said something, we made a comment, no one acknowledges it. Then 10 minutes later, a man makes a comment, the same comment, and everyone's like, great idea. Yes, good point. That comes up a lot in Ascend's leadership program. So I'm curious, Sally, what can we do when the situation happens to us?
Well, I have 2 things to say. One is what to do in the moment, and the other is what you can do to try to address that situation proactively. What I find works most effectively in the moment is to go at it with a presumption of goodwill on the part of the guy who rephrased what you said. And what is usually helpful is you want to speak up. You don't want to just let it go. What you really don't want is to let it go and then grab some other woman as you're leaving the room and complain about what happened, because that's not going to change anything. When that happens, take a moment or 2. And then it's always helpful to say things like, oh, Jim, I'm so glad you agree with my idea. Or, maybe we could talk about it later afterwards, but claim it. Make sure you get recognized for it, but don't do it in a way like that was my idea, or no defensiveness, no presumption that he was trying to rip you off, but act as if, even if you don't believe it's true, that he was just supporting you. So you want to do that right away. And do it with a light touch and do it with some humor. Very important. Don't let it go. Don't find yourself complaining about it afterwards. But in the future, if that happens, it's very helpful to engage, especially a man that has, you have some sort of allyship or some relationship with. Engage him before you go in the room and say, this has happened to me a number of times in this meeting. If it happens this time, could you also speak up in support of me? I may speak up, but it would be really helpful to have someone just acknowledge that I had made that point originally. And what's interesting is, and I've worked with this for years, when women do that, often the guy coming out of the meeting will say, that was amazing. How did you know that was going to happen? They're not noticing that happens all the time. Women notice that it happens all the time. Men don't really notice. And so then suddenly their eyes are open. And that's a very, very good way of enlisting, engaging support, going in. They can say something, oh, that was a great point, Jim. Shivani made that point as well. And then you can say, yeah, thanks so much, Jack, for pointing that out. I'd love to talk with Jim or whoever chimed in. And, maybe we can move this forward. So you want to handle it in a positive, not aggrieved way. And to the extent possible, you want to enlist an ally in advance. So someone's got your back in that room. Women can do it too, but it's very helpful to have a man do it.
I love that. I love that claiming it. And I like how you called out what not to do in that moment. Like,
Yeah.
don't just go and like complain to someone afterwards. Because I do agree. I think timing is really critical in these moments to be able to like seize it. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I love to chat about some of the limiting behaviors that you talk about in How Women Rise. So for those of you who haven't read the book, in the book, there's highlighted 12 behaviors that women tend to have. And I want to go over a couple of them. For the rest of it, you got to read the book. It's so good. So behavior number 2 is about expecting others to spontaneously notice your work and reward your contributions. That is something that really like resonates with me. I see this actually happen a lot. Or I see that question come up a lot when I'm running workshops on how to advocate for yourself. It's often like, well, but my good results just speak for themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
What advice, can you please share a little bit more about this behavior that happens and what can we do about it?
Certainly. I have to say that when I do programs, I often, if I'm doing a corporate, I'll send out the behavior sheet beforehand and I'll say to find out, which 3 or 4 behaviors are most resonant with the group, no matter what level the women are at what culture they're part of. This is always one of the top 3 behaviors, often number 1. So it is. I knew it was widespread through my experience, but I don't think I had any conception of how widespread this was. And essentially, women have often had the experience where they will say something, and as the example you've just given, it's not really picked up on. Or they'll get feedback, I think that was a little aggressive of you, or, I hadn't expected that you would speak up. They'll get a little bit of negative feedback. So they're very concerned, like, how can I do this? How can I talk about what my contributions are without seeming too ambitious, too aggressive, too assertive, too whatever? So they get very focused on how can I do that without seeming to be too much. That's not the question. You can't manage everybody's perceptions, no matter how brilliantly you phrase what your contributions are. There is probably going to be someone in the room, a man or a woman, who's going to think, boy, she's pretty arrogant. That's not your concern. Your concern is trying to figure out how to clearly and succinctly talk about what you contributed, because if you don't do that, you will be under-recognized. That's just the reality, and especially in our virtual environment, that's the reality in organizations. Most people, especially people in senior positions, are not noticing what everybody else is doing. So once you accept that responsibility, I hear women say, I believe that if I do great work, people should notice. Sure, they should. They probably should. And in a perfect world, they would, but they usually don't. So you have to accept that responsibility and put that responsibility first over trying to manage everyone else's perceptions. Because if you don't do that, and I've got a couple tips for how to do it, but if you don't do that, you will over time disengage because you will feel disheartened, and it's very difficult to be under-recognized. So just accept that that's your responsibility. And as I said, I've got a couple thoughts about how to do that in the most effective way.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such a good important call out that you are doing yourself a disservice by not highlighting those wins. And there's ways that you can strategically do that. Like we also talk about that a lot in the program. It's like, how do you shape it in a way that resonates with the group? And one thing that, that's always been a helpful reminder to me is majority of the conversations about your performance, whether or not you get promoted, happen in rooms that you're not in.
Yes.
And so you have to be the one who is creating that narrative, informing people of all the great results that you're driving. So when your manager or other decision makers are having conversations about you, you're going to be there, or they're going to be able to talk about you in the right way.
That's exactly right. Now, 2 of the things, in addition to hearing, I believe people should notice, I don't want to seem like that jerk down the hall. You're probably not like that jerk down the hall. So you don't need to necessarily worry about that. But the other thing that I hear women worry about a lot is, well, I'm part of a team and we do things as a team. So if I talk about my own contributions, isn't that stepping on the team? No, there's a way around that. You can always say, you want to do both. You don't want to be somebody who's claiming credit when it's a group effort, but you can always say, our team managed to achieve this objective. Here were some of the results. Here were some of the benefits. It was very well led. People really stepped up. Here was my contribution. So then you're not stepping on it. You don't have to feel awkward about that. So that's a very good way to do it. Two other things that are helpful. Number one, you noticed I was talking about my contribution. I keep talking about contribution. It's much better to use the language of contribution than achievement. And I find women tend to be more comfortable with it. It's also helpful to think in your own mind of your contributions as information that can be helpful for other people to know. So they understand what you have to contribute, but they also understand where a particular project, what the status of that is, what some of the issues have been. So treat it in your mind as information, not bragging because you've seen it done poorly. That's really also going to be very helpful.
I love that. That simple change of even saying contribution instead of achievement it's so simple, but I can automatically just feel like a level of comfort. And I can, as people are hearing it, they're, it's not touting it. Like someone in the chat said, like my manager said, like I sell myself too much. And I wonder if just changing that to show the impact on how you're helping others and you're just focused on raising awareness and how our project is progressing, I can see people receiving that even in a different way.
Exactly.
And I also hear a lot. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and as we become more comfortable doing it, other women will also see it done well and get more comfortable with it.
Yes, I love that. I hear all the time, like, I don't want to be seen as showing off or bragging. So I think these are, I agree with you. I was also like, you see people talking about it, and I didn't fully believe the stats until I saw it firsthand. I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of people who, there's many of us who do this. And so thank you for sharing those really practical tips. One of the other behaviors is around we overvalue expertise. So, and I think that's really important for us to talk about right now, because as we're talking about advocating for yourself, a part of it is people to notice the impact. You have to do it through influence. So, even being strategic about what words you're going to use around contribution versus achievement, or how are you going to get people bought in on the impact you're driving, that all requires influence. So I'm curious, when we overvalue expertise, what is that mistake we commonly make? And what should we be doing to prioritize and move up faster in our career?
Yeah, the mistake, and it's understandable why so many women overvalue expertise, because they've had their expertise questioned. They felt it doubted. They felt that they had to prove it. So we get very invested in proving, I'm good enough to do this job. I have the skills, et cetera, et cetera. Very important. But overvaluing expertise means underinvesting in some other capabilities. In my experience of many, many decades, the most successful careers are built on three legs: expertise, important, visibility, and connections. And the issue is when we overinvest in expertise and then pour all our energy into trying to become as good as we possibly can at the job we're doing, at the expense of securing visibility and building relationships, that undermines us. The most successful people I've ever known walk into a new project and their first question is, who do I need to know to make sure this is a success? So it's they ask who, they don't ask what. So it's a very powerful and subtle shift in thinking, to recognize that how you build connections and how you position yourself for visibility is going to be as important over time and in the long run as the expertise you accrue. Obviously, expertise important. You can't, this is not, saying that it's not important, but it needs to be a balanced approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's the foundation. And then you can't just rely on that. And I think that's a really nice segue into one of the other behaviors you call out around just building rather than building and leveraging relationships, where you talk about building connections, you talk about building allies. And so why do you feel like women aren't as great as leveraging allies? And of course, this isn't all women, it's an average from
Yes.
what you've seen. And why is this? And what should we be doing to build these allies to really help us kind of move up?
The reason, in my experience, and from having interviewed really thousands of women about this, that women can be more avid about building relationships rather than leveraging them. That is, engaging people that they know with either tactical job-related request or a strategic career-related request. The reason women can be reluctant to do that is because they are nice people, most of them. And so women will say things like, I don't want to seem like a user. I want people to know that I really value them as friends. I'm not trying to engage them to improve my own career, as if those two things were contrasting. One of the biggest, I think, reasons for and problems with this is it doesn't come from a position of believing that you have potential power. If you believe you have potential power, asking someone for help or support in something can be a very good thing for them, because then they've got you as an ally and you are someone who's going someplace. So it's a powerful way of connecting with people, is engaging people to help. Now, you want to be someone who also offers help in return, not as a quid pro quo. And research, interestingly, shows that the least effective way of engaging people to help you is to approach it in a very transactional way. Hey, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. I'll introduce you to this person if you speak up for me in this meeting. That it doesn't create a relationship there. So that's just leveraging, it's not building. But women can really benefit, and I think when they're good at it, they're great at it, by leveraging the relationships that they have, asking people for help, for support, for ideas, for introductions, whatever it is they need to help them access resources, but at the same time presenting themselves as an ally who can also be instrumental in making someone else's career a better thing.
I love that. I think I like your call out around, it's not, you don't have to focus. It's not a bad thing to ask someone for help or to leverage them. And often you're working towards the same business goal. It's normal that you need each other's help around it. And that's just the way work is done. I know when I was reading that, sometimes I still feel guilty when I'm like reaching out to someone. It feels like I'm asking them a favor. And I actually have that part of your book in my mind. I'm like, no, this is okay. Like, you have to think about the front, take a step back and not think about it as a transaction, actually, or not think about it as a favor. You're both working towards the same goals, and you need help on it. Or even if you're not working towards the same goals, it's just like part of life. And if you build a relationship, people don't feel guilty for if you ask for something, as long as you're doing it in like a really nice way.
That's exactly right. You don't want to go into it. I'm really sorry to ask you, or, you may not think this is important, or I know how busy you are, or something like that. And just make a very clean ask. One thing I always bring up is I've done a lot of research on, what makes people help other people. And the number one reason people help other people, and this is true at work, in work as well, is it makes them feel better about themselves. So, why would you deprive someone of the chance to feel better about themselves by helping you? It doesn't really make much sense. So if you go into it with that kind of way of thinking and recognize that this is about creating more opportunity for both of you in the long run, that it's a good thing. It's not something to apologize for. People may say no, they may not have the time, they may not have the bandwidth, they may think, it may not suit what they're trying to do. That's fine. There's someone else out there waiting. Don't get discouraged or disheartened.
That's another great call out around, it's normal to get a no. a no is better than a flaky yes. Everybody gets no's at some point. I know when I was emailing you to ask you if you could join us, I was nervous. I was like, what if she says no? But then I realized like, it doesn't actually matter. Then I move on. And, then I have a great story to tell. Like one time I tried emailing one of my favorite authors and, I took a shot and I missed it, but it's fine. And so that makes a lot of sense. And, as we think about like what you're focused on right now, you do a lot of leadership coaching, with executives. Ascend also in here, we do group coaching for women and peer-to-peer coaching. I'm curious, why do you think women or people in general, like, why do you think we need coaches, leadership coaches?
Well, I certainly don't think it's just women who need coaches. I mean,
Yep.
I could think of a long list of men who could definitely benefit from having a coach. I think that as we move into, and this gets to the heart of, how Women Rise is about, as we move into positions of leadership or positions of more authority and influence, habits and behaviors that have served us well in our career at an earlier stage can become problematic as we seek to rise. And yet we remain loyal to those habits and behaviors because we recognize that they've been instrumental in getting us to where we are. So in How Women Rise, what I wanted to do was look at, I was partnering here with Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote What Got You Here Won't Get You There, about the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of people as they seek to move into leadership. But he was dealing mostly with his very heavily male coaching base. So, they were things like learn to apologize and, that don't really aren't much of a problem for many women. So I wanted to add this to the conversation. These are not bad habits, but they're hard to change because they have been helpful to us. So a good coach is going to help us identify, develop a way to address those behaviors, and then help us practice and, debrief on what worked and what doesn't as we seek to adjust.
I love that. And I agree. I think a good coach will help you also realize blind spots or realize that in Elise Ascend's leadership program, often it's powerful for people to realize like, oh, wow, I'm not alone. A bunch of other smart, qualified women face the same challenges I do. I'm actually seeing a bit of that going on in the chat right now where people are like, oh, me too. Like that happens. And that in itself can be so empowering. And you can't do that on your own. Even the most capable person, like I have so many coaches and they have just helped accelerate my growth. So I completely agree with you on that. As we talk more about women leaders, what have you seen are some of the strengths of women leaders? How do you see women lead differently than men?
Well, that really goes back to the female advantage, which I revisit often to add any kind of updates to it. But in that book, what I saw as the strengths that women have are relationships. Women are often very, very skilled at building relationships. Thinking about the leveraging came in much later. Women are excellent communicators, and they're good, particularly at communicating across levels rather than necessarily up and down a chain of command. They tend to be comfortable with that. Women tend to lead when they're excellent leaders, by putting themselves in the center of things rather than at the top and drawing people in around them. Women tend to be very good at integrating who they are at home, in their neighborhood, in their marriage, in their family, with who they are at work. So it's not a real compartmentalized identity, which has been very common in the workplace until women came in. And women also tend to be much more comfortable with, as opposed to tolerant of, diversity, because they themselves have been outsiders. They understand the kind of value that a fresh perspective can bring, and they know in their bones and from experience what condescending behaviors feel like. So that can make them, more comfortable in this environment today, when the global talent force is really highly, highly diverse and will only become more so over the next decade.
Those are all such good points. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, like things that we wouldn't actually think about. And I think it's really helpful to have you put that light on it, because you've taken that like broad perspective, that like high level perspective, and like just get us out of our own head and realize like there's so many strong things that people bring to the table. And last question for you before we dive into Q&A. It's something that and so if anyone has more questions, I see a lot of great questions coming to the Q&A. Feel free to just hit the Q&A icon at the bottom right of your screen. And feel free to add questions or upvote anything that you want us to jump into. So Sally, a question for you that we ask all our guests. We often celebrate success, but don't share our failures. However, knowing how to overcome our failures is critical to success. I think today's conversation is a great example of that. What's a failure that you've had in your career, and what have you learned from it?
I'm not sure it was necessarily a failure, though it was in the wake of a significant failure of a book that I'd written that I had very high hopes for. Authors get used to failure. Not every book hits it. It's really a very common experience. But coming out of that, I hit the recession in 2008. And it was a terrifying period for me. People who work as I do were really in tough shape. And there was very little work to be had throughout most of 2009 and well into the first half of 2010. And my husband had also lost work, and we were really struggling, and we had to change our approach to everything, money, how we used our time, etc. And I have, since COVID happened, seen the fruits of that. I kept thinking, if I had not gone through that recession and learned the lessons and found the resilience that I did there, I could not have really gotten through this COVID period in the same way, because I was prepared in my mind for things to fall apart. I learned that things can fall apart and that we can have great plans and it doesn't work. And there's only so much we can control. But because there's only so much we can control does not mean that we don't need to keep trying and looking for new ways and adjusting. This is a very uncertain world we live in, and knowing how to roll with the punches is a great advantage.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful to hear, because, looking at you, you're so well put together, successful. And I think it's just like a really good reminder that everyone has struggles at one point or the other, and just learning how to pick yourself up from that and making that resilient to help you be more successful in the future is such an important life skill, and knowing how to deal with that. So thank you for sharing that and opening up to us about it. So I see a lot of great questions in the chat. One of them that people are really focusing on is about loyalty. So you talk in the book around, so the question is, feeling stuck in a position out of a sense of loyalty, what would you recommend women can do to overcome that sense of loyalty to a position and instead allow themselves to look at their own career growth?
Yeah, and this is very, very common, where women get stuck because of this commitment, this belief that they have to be loyal to the boss and loyal to the team too. I hear that as much as the boss. I don't know what this team would do without me, so I feel like I have to stay, and I'm going to turn down this opportunity because our team is at a critical point, et cetera, et cetera. So I hear a lot of that. First of all, loyalty is a wonderful trait, and it is an undervalued trait in the workplace today. So we're not talking about loyalty not being an important thing, but we always want to be thinking of the context of our own career growth. And guess what? As we grow in our career, that is good for other people. If you think your team can benefit by your staying, they probably can. But it's a great benefit to your team, the members of your team, if you move on to a more powerful position where you can be a more effective ally and advocate for them and help them achieve greater visibility and broaden their connections. So that's a good thing. It's terrific. In terms of loyalty to your boss is in a position of authority and influence. So your boss was someone who took opportunities as they came along and is going to respect you for doing that. I think I refer to this in the book, but I worked with a woman. She was at a big tech company in Boston, and she was, her boss had once said to her, you know, I was going to recommend you for that position, but you are invaluable. I can't afford to lose you. And she said, I actually went away from that feeling good. I felt valued. I felt loved. I felt like my loyalty was rewarded. She said, and then I began to realize, does that mean I'm going to be here forever? And when an opportunity came along she really wanted, she went to her boss and said, I really want this position. Can I get your support? And she was afraid to say that because he had said she was invaluable. And he said, of course you get my support. You have been so fantastic here. And he went out of his way to try to make that happen. And she was so surprised. So she saw that his definition of loyalty was a little bit different than what hers was. Her definition of loyalty was staying with him no matter what. His definition of loyalty is, you've contributed so much and I really want to show my loyalty to you by helping you.
I love that. That's how I would think about that too, is, you know, people who've asked me for help, I'm like, yes, you're awesome. Like, let's go do it. And I've had the same way, like my managers have gone above and beyond for me, even after they stopped managing me, or when I was applying to business school, my manager was as excited that I'd gone to business school as I was, even though that meant I was going to leave his team. And then he had to hire someone. So that is so true. Yes. One more question for you before we wrap up is, there's a question in here around, you know, I get easily overwhelmed at work. I try to hide this at work because I don't want to see as incompetent or unable to handle my job. How can I ask my manager or peers to help me talk through work or projects when I'm feeling like this without seeming weak or incompetent? So really, how can we ask for help without making it feel like we don't know what we're doing or that incompetent feeling?
I think there are a couple of things that are helpful here. First of all, this is a perfect situation. This is a perfect reason why having a peer coach, if you don't have a coach, is so important. A peer coach is somebody with whom you can have that first conversation about what's really bothering you and get some honest feedback. You're playing the same role for them. So that's really helpful. You want to have somebody you can kind of test out what your feelings are. But secondly, you know, this is an overwhelming time. A lot of people feel overwhelmed. There's so much talk about burnout and even awareness among a lot of leaders that, you know, this is getting a little bit precarious for their workforce. So don't take it on as weak, as your own personal weakness that you feel overwhelmed. This is an overwhelming time and many people are being asked to do a lot. So recognize that. And if you put that in your own mind, that you're conscientious, not weak. You're someone who's deeply committed to doing a good job, not someone who's overwhelmed. If you kind of change your narrative to yourself about what's happening to you, then you will be less likely to use language that conveys fear, panic, overwhelmedness, when you talk about it. And you can talk about it in a more neutral kind of sense without the shame. It's often the shame that goes along with it that complicates it, not just the reality of the situation. So that's what I would recommend here.
That's I think that call out on, like, it's usually the shame that is overpowering, is 100%. If you go into feeling like this is normal, then you're gonna feel comfortable asking for it. You're gonna navigate the conversation better instead of it. Thank you for sharing that. You know, there's so many good nuggets that Sally has shared today. I'm curious, like, put what your favorite takeaway from today's chat, or one of your favorite takeaways. There's many. Throw that in the chat. So what's one of your favorite takeaways? We covered a lot about, you know, when you make a comment in a meeting and someone else says the same thing and no one acknowledges it. Like, what do you do in that moment? Shifting your wins to talk about the contributions you're bringing instead of what you're achieving. We talked about influencing, leveraging allies. So put your favorite takeaway in the chat. Visibility, connection, expertise. I love that. These are all, yeah, this is Like so many good nuggets. It's such a big, I just reread the book, but it's such a good refresher here. All of it. Love it, Laura. I love the reminder to leverage your allies rather than just building relationships, loyalty, talking about contributions, having allies, contributions. There's no harm in shame asking for help, 100%. I feel so encouraged to share my contributions in building allyships, relationships. These are all so good. +1 on visibility, connection, expertise, being constructive after humiliation, being ignored. These are really amazing. Sally, how can people keep in touch with you? Highly recommend reading How Women Rise if you haven't already. Otherwise, go back and reread it now that we got to hear it directly from the author herself. How can people find you, Sally?
Sure, you can get in touch with me through LinkedIn. That's where I'm active. I'm on the others, but that's the one I check in with. And as you discovered, respond to people. And also my website's got a lot of information. I have a monthly newsletter on LinkedIn, so you can sign up to subscribe to that. That deals with a lot of these ideas and expands them. But my website, of course, sallyhelgesen.com. And it's got a contact button there if you're interested in getting in touch with me, you want to bring me into your company, whatever. So I get a lot of follow-up that way as well.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining us today. This was such an amazing conversation. It was truly an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you, Shivani. I really enjoyed it. And I look forward, I hope you send me the favorite takeaways. That's always helpful to me.
Yeah,
All
definitely.
right.
I will definitely send it to you. And thank you to everyone for joining. I loved the energy in the chat. There's so many good takeaways. And as we're talking, like people will be like, yes, that happens to me too. Or like, but yes, this is me. And so that was so great. It made it feel like we're just going through this experience together. If you really found these topics valuable and you're like, I really want to develop skills around how to influence, I want to learn how to better lead my teams, advocate for myself, then I'd love to invite you to join us in Ascend's leadership program. The program starts at the end of June. Lilia is going to drop the link to apply in there. It takes less than 8 minutes to apply if you would like. We have an amazing group coming at the end of June. We have women from Google, Amazon, Slack, Salesforce, and many other companies. If you're interested, just you can apply. Note that you attended today so we can expedite your application. Thank you again, Sally. This conversation was amazing. We're going to send you the recording to everybody so you can always refer back to it. And take care, everyone. Check out the book and stay well. Bye, everyone.